Before I start, I just wanted to tell you that with all of those accolades that Paul gave me, he's one of my young heroes because he started an organization that I failed at, and he made this possible, and it means an awful lot. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, everyone, for giving me your time this evening. I am honored to be here, and especially honored to have this opportunity to tell you a small bit of my story. It has been nearly 60 years since I first became an activist, and in that time, our world has drastically changed. Where to start? Well, I don't know, but the 50s was an era of great expectation and optimism in Canada, but also one of conflict. After World War II, most Canadians were eager to have children. They were confident that the future had nothing but peace and prosperity. The arms race was starting, and by the end of the decade, we were all firmly entrenched in the Cold War. For many people, the prosperity in the Cold War were overshadowed by a cloud of inequality. Gay men and women were still jailed.
We got your back, Ted.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is a very emotional day for me. Gay men and women were still jailed in Europe after the war. Thank you, Penny. The last being released in 1969. You see, it was still illegal to be gay in most of Europe and the rest of the world. And the Allies would not justify releasing homosexuals from the camps at the end of the war. For gay men and women, we were labeled as mentally ill, non-human. We were subject to a hospitalization, shock treatment, and even worse, a lobotomy. Thank God they never made me yet, because I was still running at that time. But both of them often left the patient as a vegetable. If we were lucky enough to escape the mental hospital, we were thrown in jail. Families disowned their children, and whole communities would turn against gay men and women. It was a time when walking the streets meant danger. We carried rocks in our bags, bear spray in our back pockets, because we knew that the law would never support us. They would most likely arrest us, or even worse. We lived in fear for our lives, and for too many. And for too many, that fear was proven to be justifiable. That prosecution, though it may sound to most people hopeless, it also drove us together as a community. We took comfort in knowing that we were not alone. We congregated in people's homes, and when behind those doors, we experienced a freedom that we craved to have in our lives. Bonds that would last my entire lifetime were formed in those tight-knit groups. It was there that our anger, our frustrations, they really came out heavily. We wore scarves in our back pockets, developed our own set of signals, because to identify ourselves in public but we were never allowed to engage each other on the street as gay men and women. No matter how close our bonds may have been, the deep-rooted fear and the fear of getting a public beating meant too much to acknowledge each other, and we were risking too much. There were many times when I had to walk by a dear friend, pretending that I did not know them, wanting nothing more than just a hug. But it said now, not everyone in the community was so shy. Some took great pleasure in acting out against the conventions of society. I remember one really famous little squirt of ours, who we took to calling Mercy May. She had this terrible habit, and he would run up to anybody that was cute on the street, trust me. They weren't ugly. But he would either grab his rear or the other parts, and then he would run down the street screaming, "Mercy, mercy, mercy." He often got away, but a lot of times he got caught, and he received a very bad thrashing. I could never understand what drove him to this behavior, but looking back, I would not be surprised if he received treatments at the hand of doctors in an attempt to cure him of his homosexuality. I myself was a very fortunate young man. My family loved me. And supported me no matter what my orientation was. Oh. I can remember my father, who was the head of security for Western Command during the war, telling me that he would always love me, that there was nothing I would do in my life that he had not seen in the military at one time or the other. My mother and my grandmother were the greatest supporters I ever had in my life. They stood defiantly, challenging anyone who would dare to harass their young boy. I lived, compared to most people, a very blessed life. That unconditional love gave me strength. It made my life that much easier because I knew that no matter what, I always had a home, a safe place to go when things were dark. But it also meant that when I looked around at our community, I got angry. I knew in my heart that the public beatings, the prosecutions were wrong, and I needed to do something about it. But I did not know what to do or how to start. Excuse me. In time, I would discover my way in the mid-1950s. I went to Los Angeles to train as a nurse, because in Canada, males were not allowed to attend any nursing school. In my time, well, in the time that I was there, I had a very torrid affair with a senior member of the clergy. But that is another story. But the only reason I mention this to you tonight, not that I'm bragging, because I used to be young and pretty. Thank you. But it gave me a chance to meet some very high, powerful people, and they taught me a great deal about the world and business and how I was to react and how I was to act as a young gentleman. Besides my grandmother, he was one of my best teachers, in both ways. I traveled and spent much time in San Francisco, at the cafes in the Castro District and in Polk Street. It was there I met the men and women of the civil rights movement, where I found people with the same passion for equality and freedom, and for the next couple of years, I traveled between Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Vancouver, And on my journeys, I found friendships and formed the greatest ones that would forever change my life. I found an activist in me and discovered a path that I would follow for the rest of my life. Don't let me look at you, Barb. I can remember standing on the step of the courthouse protesting for equality and watching as the world silently walked by. I never had a voice, and if I was ever going to make a difference, I needed to have that voice. It was a dear friend of mine from Portland, Oregon, Mame, that told me what I needed to do. In 1958, I stood on the steps of the Vancouver courthouse in high drag. And for those who, thank you, Paul. And for those who don't know what high drag is, well, we've got a couple of them right over there.
Stand up, peekaboo, show everyone.
Come on, stand up.
Come on.
And while we're talking about drag, I have another famous drag queen in the house from Toronto tonight as my special guest. Ladies and gentlemen, the Empress of Toronto, Michelle DeBerry. The only reason I'm introducing her tonight is because she's older than I am. By 10 years. Yay! Well, I guess at that point I had found my voice. It was illegal for a man to impersonate a female or a woman, and we were required by law to wear 3 items of men's clothing. So even to this day, when I get dressed in drag, well, this is a different kind of drag, but when I get dressed up in drag, I wear my men's socks for my boobs, because you gotta have good boobs, honey, if you're gonna be a drag queen. And I wear my men's shorts. It makes me feel still masculine. We also rarely took a female name, lest we be accused of trying to entrap a straight male. So no matter what happened, if you were found in a dress, doing anything in public, even in a very small little bar somewhere, every drag queen had to take their hair off. And I thought that was disgusting. So I just decided that I was going to say, no, I'm not taking my wig off, but I will do one concession. I wanted to be known as a male, and I wanted them to know that I was a proud gay male. And so today I am, and still will always be, Mr. Ted North. That really picked off the undercover policeman, you know, because when I said, my name is Mr. Ted North, nobody could say a damn word. That day changed me and gave me the strength I needed to step up and challenge. Not just bullies, but anyone who would take away another one's rights. It would result in many wins for me and our community, but it also made us a target. The press campaigned against us, and we were accused of propagating a homosexual agenda and of preying on children to convert them to our deviant lifestyles. They published our names, our addresses, and even our phone numbers. The only time I changed my addresses in the 50s and 60s, I changed it 20 times. Since then, I have had 2 addresses in over 50 years. So we did accomplish another thing. Vancouver Sun took to accusing me of running a mafia-style gang. I became famously known as Ted North and his Lavender Hill Mob. Like, hello, Jack Wasserman, what were you thinking? I was a mark, and I knew it. In 1963, following the freedom marches in the United States, protesting racial inequality, a small group of us decided that we too needed to march. And we did. We had our first freedom march that year. We endured taunts, death threats, rocks, and the risk of jail because we believed that beyond anything else, we were human beings. We had a right to live our lives, and we had the right to love freely. We marched for basic freedoms to simply change our status in society. We were tired of being locked up, not for committing crimes, but for simply being alive. We needed to be acknowledged as the human beings that we were, not the animals that they claimed we were. We also started protesting in small ways with writing letter campaigns, working with politicians, law enforcement, and to change perceptions, we handwrote thousands of letters. I joined the Young Liberals of Canada, not because I was an ardent supporter of that party, but rather they were the only federal party who had shown any sympathy for the plight of gays and the things that I believed in. We continued to campaign, to write letters, and it was not long before our actions caught the attention of Tommy Douglas and a young Pierre Trudeau. We believed in Trudeau, and we worked very hard to support him as he made his way through the halls of power. It was with great pride that we saw him eventually elected Prime Minister, and to this day I have always fond memories of that man and what he did for us. By 1964, I had already spent much time in the city of Portland, and it was there that I and a small group concocted the idea of creating a monarchist society. Maybe most of the gay men I knew were monarchists, but maybe it was the crowns and the gowns. But no matter the reason, we were drawn to the glamour of the Imperial Royal Courts in Europe. Portland itself had, for many years, already had a royal court. It was renowned for its work in the community as activists and as a safe haven. It was from this that a small group of us came up with the idea of having courts. So in 1964, I founded the Imperial Empire of Canada. I was crowned an empress by the court in Portland, and in 50 years later, I still hold that title. And I am real proud of the legacy of our court system. In 2014, I celebrate my 50th year as Empress. Its members helped to lead the charge for equality and offered our community a safe haven and raised over $15 million, all through grassroots fundraising. In 1969, when homosexuality was decriminalized, Prime Minister Trudeau personally called me. I answered the phone, and I didn't have a secretary in those days, so I had to answer the phone. But he didn't. He warned me who was on the phone. So I answered the phone and was greeted as Your Majesty. And I responded, "Good evening, Mr. Prime Minister," just as the Queen of England would do, because I just thought that was a queenly thing to do. It was a moment that I cherish to this day. Whoever thought that a man in a dress would be greeted in such a way by the Prime Minister of Canada. But then Trudeau never was a conventional man, and I think he rather enjoyed being the odd man out. Our fight for equality never ended discrimination. Yes, we had earned the right to life without being jailed, but we still had far to go, and we needed to change people's perceptions and have them understood. We were not the danger that the media still claimed. Our small marches of protest started to morph and spread around the world. We piggybacked on the 60s liberty, freedom, peace, and today pride parades have grown sadness, but also many moments of great joy. I have lived a life that is filled with experiences which I will never, never forget. And I've had the privilege of being a part of so many great moments. Thank you very much.